in cahoots with the British government. There's no doubt about it.
And that was new?
That was new for a private person, yes, yes.
But then, in the early 70s, Stirling had a terrible car crash in the Scottish Highlands. He nearly died and spent a long time recovering at his family estate, Keir, in Scotland. Stirling was forced to give up all his mercenary activities and his arms dealing. He went into semi-retirement. His crusade to keep Britain powerful seemed to be over.
As Prime Minister, I want to speak to you simply and plainly about the grave emergency now facing our country. In the House of Commons this afternoon, I announced more severe restrictions on the use of electricity. We are limiting the use of electricity to 3 days a week. The reason why is quite simple. The problem of the supply of oil and the problem of the rise in the price of oil. Jobs will be in danger and take-home pay will be less. In terms of comfort, we shall have a harder Christmas than we have known since the war.
The price of oil had been massively increased as a result of the Arab-Israeli war. The oil-producing states, led by King Faisal of Saudi Arabia, were furious at American support for Israel. Their action had catastrophic effects on the Western economies.
Doesn't this new massive increase in the price of oil mean a change in the world balance of power between the developing nations like you, the producers, and us, the developed industrialized nations?
Yes, it will.
And what do you think arises from that?
Well, a new type of relationship. You have to adjust yourself to the new circumstances. And I think you have to sit down and talk seriously with us about this new era.
In 1974, David Stirling came back to Mayfair. He found it completely transformed. It had become the social centre for the oil-rich Arabs, and the Clermont Club had changed too. It had been taken over by the Playboy organisation, and they allowed Arabs in for the first time.
When I took over at the Clermont Club, Arabs had been excluded from the Clermont. And we opened the doors to them, the very rich Arabs who were gamblers. And that made the club. I was able to pay for the club in 6 months. We sort of maintained the exclusivity by only inviting those Arabs who were big gamblers to join the Clermont too.
Again, it's what one brings to the table. Arabs knew that they were mixing with the likes of British aristocracy, and their passport was money. The Arabs had their money. The English, maybe that Clermont crowd, felt they had their aristocracy, their lineage, their sheer snobbery. They knew the Arabs would have loved to have been part of it, and they could pay the price. There's nothing new here. I mean, we had aristocracy marrying heiresses, American heiresses, to bring money to the families. This is nothing new. But it was blatant in the 70s. It was in their faces.
One has to say, putting it as tastefully as one possibly can, that I think some of them are a little unfamiliar with the Western lavatory. I mean, I can understand that if you walk in and you haven't seen one before, it does look a very strange and unsympathetic object. And quite obviously, rather than using it, an awful lot of them have preferred to use the floor. And unfortunately, without clearing up some of the mess over a long period.
What has been the result of that in the flats?
Well, its main unpleasantness has been the smell, which has come up the ventilating shafts with such ferocity on some afternoons that we haven't been able to go into the bathrooms. I mean, I must say that the aroma of Levantine remains will be with me to the day I drop.
The other effect of the oil price rise on Britain was industrial chaos. Government attempts to hold down wages led to violent strikes. To Stirling, it seemed as if the country he had fought to keep great was now collapsing from inside. So as a man of action, he decided he was going to do something about it.
he felt that the country was getting out of control, that again, stability of this country was now really threatened. He felt that the extreme unions were very dangerous, that there was a sort of possibility of undemocratic action taking place in this country. And he felt that this was a time for planning a contingency operation to stop this happening.
David Stirling returned to his traditional recruiting ground, the clubs of Mayfair. He formed an organisation called Great Britain 75. It was a group of military men, many of them ex-SAS. They planned to take over the running of Britain if the strikes led to the collapse of civil order.
If a political strike is going to cause the country and the economy irreversible damage, we're there to come in and help to avoid that occurring. And we also believe that if we didn't exist and the left-wing activists create this situation of this general strike, which would result in the surge being out in the streets within a few hours in certain areas, and we believe that government would be unable to negotiate under that sort of duress.
You talk about patriotism, but surely your organisation is an indication that you haven't got much faith in government to deal with the situation.
I've got awfully little faith in the present situation of Parliament as a whole, whether it's Conservative or Socialist. If we had that faith, and we thought that the government could deal with this handful of left-wing activists, there would be no need for our existence.
All those in favour of that procedure, please show.
Stirling also formed a secret organisation within the trades union movement itself. Its job was to fight and undermine the left-wing union leaders.
Let's have some quiet, will you? It's quite out of order for people to interrupt the way...
One of Stirling's main supporters was Kate Lazinska of the Civil and Public Servants Association.
What David Stirling was really concerned about was the threat of communist infiltration, not only within the trade union movement, but in other elements that mattered in this country.
And what did he set out to do?
He set out to create, if you like, a group of people who understood what was happening and would fight and do something about it.
Experienced over...
Kate, I must tell you that if you do not leave the rostrum... Kate, if you do not leave the rostrum, I will switch the power off.
You're wrong.
He planned it like a military operation, and he would teach us to identify at any particular point in time what the next job should be, what our next move should be. He was very good at this. He would say, well, you know, now is the time to make this move or that move. I suppose it was a bit like being in the army.
Much of the money to fund Stirling's operations came from his friend at the Clermont Club, James Goldsmith. Like Stirling, Goldsmith believed that politicians no longer had the power to control Britain. It should be done instead by men trained in what he called executive action.
Let's make it quite clear that if you take a nation which is one of the most prosperous, one of the finest, one of the most dominant, one of the most influential in the world, and turn it in 20 years into a relative pauper of Europe, an invalid of the world, everything has to be wrong and everybody is to blame. Our tradition is that the leaders in Parliament, in government, are drawn from Parliament, from the House of Commons principally. People with practically no experience of executive action at all. Now, what I'm suggesting is that they are not equipped for doing that, taking that executive action, and that they should be drawn from the nation.
At this very moment, power was taken away from the British politicians, but not by Stirling or Goldsmith or their friends in the clubs of Mayfair. It was by the Arabs. The very people who Stirling had once tried to control now stepped in to change Britain's domestic policy. In early 1976, the markets started to panic about Britain's economy. Foreign investors started to withdraw their money and the pound slid dramatically. This crisis was far